just wanted to talk about automating things. Automation is, like, I think it's the funnest part of systems management, is when you automate stuff, because you eliminate people's jobs. Oh wait,
no. No.
No, I didn't. No. No, automation is fun because it can really help you get things done faster and realize a lot of cost savings and things like that. And so sometimes as I go out and I talk to people, I hear people tell me about how it's hard to get like management approval to invest in automating things, because it costs a lot of money sometimes, and sometimes it's hard to see the return on investment. And so we wanted to have just a talk today about how to make a good case for automating your processes and be able to make that case, get the investment, actually automate some things, and realize the benefits of that automation. So some of the challenges that we face today, everything is getting so complicated. We have hybrid clouds and public clouds and private clouds and hosted private clouds, and we've got all kinds of different clouds. We've got SaaS and PaaS and IaaS and pretty much anything else AAS. There's everything coming out now, and even desktop as a service, as we heard out here a minute ago. Everything's going virtual. We've got virtual networks. We've got virtual machines. We've got storage,
virtual
virtualization.
Storage, yeah.
Everything's going virtual. We've got the software-defined data center happening, so everything's becoming much more complicated. Labor costs are fairly high for IT, because IT people that are skilled are in very high demand, and so the cost of IT labor is going up. There's always constant pressure from the business to drive down costs, deliver more value to the business. Things are getting, the users that we have in our organization are becoming more and more sophisticated. As a younger generation comes up and enters the workforce, these are kids that are, they grow up with a computer, instead of a book or whatever, and and now they're entering the workforce, and they expect to have that same level of technology as part of their job. We see the rise of trends like bring your own device that makes things complicated. And these users expect things to always be on, to be real time, to be highly available. There's a lot of demands on us as IT people to deliver what these users are demanding. And then lastly is, we see so much more global business being done today. The business world is pretty much 24/7 anymore. You've got people that are all over the world. Even a small company like Cyrusson, we're only 14 people. But
we're global.
We're global. We're global. We're here. I work 24/7. I've got a dev in New Zealand. I've got a dev in Chicago. Another dev in Florida. Chris has consultants all over the U.S.
All over the U.S. I'm in Denver.
It's just a very fast-paced, lots of businesses all over the world, and it just creates a lot of challenges. So to deal with these challenges, there's kind of two approaches we can do. One is sort of the manual effort approach, where we can look at things like, let's train our people to be more effective. Or maybe we can hire some people that have more skills or knowledge. Or we can hire less expensive people from like China or India to do certain tasks and lower our costs that way. So there's kind of different things we can do from a manual approach to drive down our costs. And then there's the automated approach. And the automated approach requires a larger upfront investment, because we have to invest in creating that automation. But over time, we see an ROI on that because it reduces our labor costs. And we also have to consider the ongoing maintenance of that automation. And when we automate things, there will be times that the automation fails. And so we have to plan for somebody spending time going and dealing with those exceptions when they happen. And so there's kind of these two different approaches. I'm not necessarily saying one is always right. And today we just kind of want to focus on the automation side of things and how to make a good case for investing in automation using the System Center management tools to automate things and hopefully realize some benefits from that. So if you think about some of the different types of automation you could have, I think about there being kind of 4 different categories of things. The first kind is what I call service request fulfillment. So some examples of that would be onboarding a new employee, granting permissions to a user, provisioning a virtual machine. These are things that people request. Please do this for me, IT guy, I love you, please hurry up. Yeah, that's the way it goes, right? So service request fulfillment. Another type of automation is repetitive procedures. So some examples of this would be asset disposal. You know, somebody is done using a particular computer, we need to go through a repetitive process of properly disposing of that asset. And patching, every Patch Tuesday, here it comes, you know, we've got to do patching, and it's everybody's favorite job, right? And so, you know, if we can automate that, that's a good thing. Disaster recovery testing is something that organizations typically do repetitively, like once a month or once every 6 months. They'll actually test their disaster recovery procedure. The third category is troubleshooting, diagnostics, and recovery. So here we might execute some recovery scripts whenever a particular type of error happens. We might automate our procedure for scaling up and down. So for example, if we see a lot of traffic coming into our website, we might provision some additional web servers automatically. And vice versa, when we see the traffic drop, we might turn off some of those web server VMs. And we could also run some diagnostics automatically. And the last category is DR and HA procedures and testing. So some examples here would be monthly tests of our DR procedures. We could automate that. We can automate our backup procedure. We can automate failover. So there's kind of these general 4 categories I think of for automation. There's probably many other examples that you can think of for automating things, but these are just some of the more common categories of things that I see. Now, one other kind of interesting scenario that I've actually been talking to people about just this week. This is like a new idea that I had about automation. And this is kind of an interesting idea, is this idea of elevated privilege automation. So one of the problems you have is administrators typically have high-level permissions to systems. They can go in and they can change lots of things. And that's maybe not a good thing. You know, if somebody goes in and changes some things that they shouldn't, or they mistakenly make a change to something, or maybe they're actually get mad at the company and they're going to go do something bad, right? And there's always a constant maintenance of their permissions that the people have to these systems as they come and go from departments or leave the company and so on. And so this idea I had was that we could use automation to control this better. So the idea is that you don't give your system administrators these high-level permissions at all. No access. But what you do is you automate all the changes that they should be making, and you have the automation process run as the high-level privilege. And the only way that they can make changes to the system is to request those changes through the automation system. And then you can have it be approved by somebody, reviewed and approved first before the automation happens. And only the automation system is actually touching things. So you reduce the human error. You make sure that everything is reviewed and approved before any changes actually happen. And you make sure that people don't have access to the system that they shouldn't. And the other kind of cool benefit of this is that when you want to ensure that nobody makes any changes to the system, rather than going in and revoking people's permissions, you can just go in and disable the workflows so that they're not allowed to run against the server. And that way you can be sure that no changes will happen to that server because the automation is not going to touch it. So it's kind of an interesting idea of how you could leverage automation to do things in maybe a more secure way. So let's go on to kind of think about some of the keys to successful automation. When I think about successful automation projects that Chris and I have been involved in, they have a few common elements. One is that you want to make things self-service. So people can come in, they can make their requests, they can view the status of those requests, they can update their requests, cancel their requests. All of that sort of thing is done via self-service. Another really important thing is to capture data in a structured way. So when I say structured data, what I mean is that your automation engine is going to need certain pieces of information that the user can provide. An example of that would be if you're going to add a user to a group in Active Directory, the automation engine needs to know 2 things: which user, which group. And so when you have somebody requesting something, you want to capture the data that's in a structured format. You don't want a simple like text box where they type in the name of a group or the name of a user. You want them to actually select a user and select a group and pass those exact object IDs into the automation engine so that it can perform the automation. So we need to look for opportunities to capture data in a structured way and pass it into the automation engine. Next is to have lots of transparency to the process. So you want to be able to communicate to the requester or the person that's doing the automation exactly what the current status is. And a great way to do that is via notification. So continuously be sending out emails that say, you know, we're done with step 2, we're working on step 3 now. Just kind of always be transparent about the current status of the request. Then it's important to have a plan for failure. Okay? With automation, things are pretty much always going to occasionally fail. You know? So we need to have a plan in place for how to deal with those failures. But where we can, we should create automation that recovers automatically from those failures. And so that's what I call automation resiliency. So the ability that when a failure happens, I actually have more automation which automates the recovery of that failure, right? So that way we don't have to spend so much time manually resolving failures. And lastly is to, just as a matter of process when you're doing an automation project, is to document your requirements, document your design, review that with the stakeholders, get it approved by everyone so that everyone's bought into the plan, and then go and implement it. And we'll talk about more about these project management scenarios here in a minute. Next, as you think about your automation technology, being the lead PM for Service Manager, of course, I think of Service Manager as being at the middle of everything. But Service Manager is the configuration management database. It's the store of kind of all of your IT information in one place. All your computers, all the properties about those computers, the relationship of those computers to users, work items, all of that stuff is all in one database. And as you do your automation, you want to be able to get and set data from that CMDB. And secondly, Service Manager provides your work item infrastructure. So where you want to create work items like a service request or an incident to track the progress of fulfilling this automation, Service Manager is the place to do that. Now, Service Manager has its own workflow engine that you can use to automate things, such as notifications, or even you can drop PowerShell scripts into that engine to run it. Or you have two other options. You can use the System Center Orchestrator workflow engine to create automated runbooks that can automate things. Or you can use Microsoft's new Service Management Automation Platform, which is a PowerShell workflow-based automation platform to automate things. And then I think of the other System Center components as kind of the final touch automation engines. So typically, Orchestrator or SMA don't touch the actual devices directly. They touch the devices and do changes through Operations Manager, Configuration Manager, Data Protection Manager, Virtual Machine Manager, et cetera. So an example of that would be like new VM provisioning. So typically you would not create an Orchestrator runbook that would go directly to a host and provision a virtual machine. You would go through Virtual Machine Manager and have the Virtual Machine Manager agent on a host provision the VM. Same with things like software deployment or patching. You wouldn't have Orchestrator directly patch a machine, you would do it through Configuration Manager. So these other components of System Center are very key technology pieces in automating things. Okay, so some challenges to automation. Not everybody's excited about automation. I love automation. Who loves automation here? It's awesome. Oh. Heck yeah. Yes. Everybody loves automation. Well, not really. Not everybody. Some people are worried about their job. You know, are you going to automate them out of a job? So when I first got out of college, I went and I worked at a company called Aquantive, and it's an internet advertising technology company. And I would load client advertising campaigns into the advertising system. And that sounds really complex and fancy, but what it really was copying data from one Excel spreadsheet to another, to another, to another, and then importing it into the database by hand. there's a lot of Control-C, Control-V all day long. It's not exactly my dream job right out of college. So I wrote an Excel add-in that I called the RAD tool that automated that whole process, and that would take somebody a half a day to do, and it would be done in like 2 minutes. And I had my wife record her voice say, "Ooh, RAD tool," and it would play at the end of every time that the automation ran. So you push the button, you wait for a minute or two, and your screen's flashing, and then it gets to the end, "Ooh, RAD tool." Well, I kind of automated about 10 people out of a job, so I wasn't real popular, but we were a fast-growing company, and so we found other things for people to do. But this is a real thing that people are concerned about, that if you automate things, then they can lose their job potentially. So to overcome this type of challenge, it's really important to communicate to people what their opportunity is. And their opportunity is, hey man, if we automate this really boring part of your job, we actually have these other really cool projects that we want you to work on that are much better than this boring part of your job. So don't worry about it. Your job is secure. We're just trying to move on and actually add value to the business and get you out of this boring thing. So it's really important to communicate to people up front what their opportunity is. And then also think about rewarding people that are actively trying to automate things and make things better. So look for people that are being aggressive in trying to automate things and reward them for that. And then there's the high upfront costs. And so when business decision makers like yourselves are looking at these projects like, oh, that's going to cost a lot of money to hire a consultant to come in and do this, it's really important to look at the future return on investment. And Chris is going to go through some great case studies of some automation projects we've done that show a clear ROI. And if you focus on that ROI, the upfront cost becomes less of a concern. And another thing you can do to reduce your high upfront costs is to hire people that are experienced in automating things with Orchestrator or service management automation. And that way you can get the project done faster and likely for lower cost. Even though those consultants can be expensive, it's probably lower cost than if you had somebody on your staff that didn't have that experience that you were trying to get to do it. And then there's a lack of knowledge. Some people are just afraid of what they don't know. And so, in order to get over this concern, it's just a matter of getting some additional training, allowing people on your team the flexibility to go and learn the new technologies that are necessary, and rewarding those people that do go out and spend the time to learn the new technologies and ways of doing things. The next concern is sometimes there's just so many things you could automate, it's overwhelming. You don't know which one to start with and so on. And so when we go into these projects, we recommend that people start with something really small. Just automate a very simple thing first. Learn the pattern of how to automate things and then move on to more complex projects. And lastly is the fear of change. People are resistant to change in general. And whenever you automate something, it's typically a change in the process, and that makes people feel uncomfortable. So really it's just a matter of making sure that everyone understands exactly what is going to change and communicate that broadly, get buy-in from the people that it's going to affect. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Chris, and he's going to actually talk through a few of the case studies that Cyrusson and one of our partners, Concurrency, have done with different customers, just to talk about some of the benefits of automation. So go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Travis. So this is the fun part, because this is where I get to tell stories.
No, my part's the fun part.
All right, let me take that back. This is the fun part for me.
Oh, okay.
So basically, we sat down, and what we wanted to do was kind of quantify what does automation really bring to organizations. And we reached out to a partner, Nate at Concurrency, like Travis said, and we said, do you have any great examples that you've done that have been really effective and really kind of drive home the point of automation so that people can really start to see the big picture behind what really happens and what the use cases behind that are. So I sat down and I started collecting this information, and I kind of came up with, number one, these are huge case studies. They're quite involved, quite advanced, but I wanted to boil that down in such a way that we could all really take it in and rationalize it. So there's four main areas I focused on: the profile of the customer, what their problem was, what the solution was, and what the effects of that solution were in the end. So with that, let me introduce our first case study. Our first case study is an enterprise manufacturing company, and this company is 400,000 assets big, 200,000 employees, and they really needed an effective way to support user operations across their 4,000 IT staff and 8,000 locations worldwide. Now, this is massive. This is absolutely bonkers in terms of scale and scale of economy. So their problem was that every year they were generating 500,000 requests for these 200,000 workers rather. Their 4,000 IT staff had to support those 500,000 rather requests, and each request took about an hour of time to work through. And these are things like workstation ordering, application deployment, software deployment, imaging, kind of the basics of running an organization, regardless of who you are. So just to quantify that, that's 500,000 man hours, or worker hours, if you will, doing these activities that were quite time consuming. So what did the solution look like? Well, they had an idea. What if we took this and we utilized Service Manager and the self-service portal with service requests to automate with Microsoft Orchestrator the deployment of systems. And really what they came up with was self-service workstation ordering from a catalog with 4,000 specific items in it, which then places the order automatically to the hardware vendor itself. They ship the order directly to the facility, one of those 8,000 locations worldwide, where the automation then kicks in with Configuration Manager, automatically creates the asset in the database through the data feed and the hardware vendor. So it's already there and ready to go. When it lands, they plug it in, it's imaged immediately, and they get the specific software that the user's role is set up to get, and really created an end-to-end process around this that minimized the number of requests that actually needed to be handled quite significantly. In fact, so much so that they've run this automation 90,000 times in 2013. That has created an overall savings of roughly $2 million in outside service. Yeah, we'll go one more over. Yeah, $2 million in outside services and over $1 million in software costs. So doing the math on that, 90,000 times, they saved $3 million total, and it was costing them just loads of money before. For the cost of this, they got this down to under 15 cents, I believe, to actually develop the automation so that this could just happen very quickly, very agile.
Yeah, so if you took the cost of what it took to automate this and you divided it by the number of times that it was automated, each automation costs 15 cents to automate.
And decreasing every day.
Right. And then you look at one person's man hour to fulfill each request, that's maybe $50 an hour or something.
Yeah.
And so, huge cost savings.
Absolutely. So the next scenario is a healthcare organization. This is actually one that's close to me. They're right down the street from where I live. This healthcare organization based in Colorado has about 4,000 workers. So that's our heart there. We love our workers. And they're ranked one of the highest in the United States anyways for what they do. Their problem was that each month they would conduct, we'll do that, software patching, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but software patching in a hospital is quite an interesting proposition. In this case, they have over 100 business systems or platforms that need to be patched every month that involved over 400 servers. So again, it doesn't sound horrible, but what ended up happening was they would have the platform manager, what I call the PM, if you will, or the service owner, depending on if you want to speak ITIL or not. They would have these 100 people come in one day, one night, a month, and hang out from 7 p.m. until 6 a.m., at which point the server team would reach out to a specific platform manager and say, hey, we're ready to push patches to your platform. Are you ready? And the platform manager would say, no, you take that down right now, somebody may die. That's a bad thing. So they would have this back and forth. Well, okay, give us a call when the coast is clear and we can start this. So ultimately, if you take these 100 people and that's an 11-hour stretch of time, just say it's 5 hours that each person had to dedicate once a month. Again, we've got 500 hours a month, and there's obviously the power platform and communications were very, very arduous in order to do anything around, just for normal patch maintenance and compliance. The solution. Well, let's take all that information that we have and that we've gathered out of Operations Manager with distributed applications. Let's bring it into Service Manager, and let's quantify those as business services within Service Manager. Now we can put an owner to a service. So I've got medical platform XYZ, and that belongs to Travis Wright. And I know this now, and I know that the dependencies of that platform have far-reaching tentacles that reach a lot of other platforms. So I get visibility now, and I can start to track compliance. So if I see that Travis's platform is out of compliance with patches, I can let Travis know. I can automate that communication as well. So really bringing down the barrier here to success. But the great thing was Travis can now step up to his computer and he knows the best time to patch his systems anyways. He knows that, well, we don't have any, XYZ medical platform being used from 1 until 2 p.m. on a Wednesday instead of, 7 p.m. until 6 a.m. At night and just waiting around. So he can come up to the self-service portal, see his specific business services, and say, yes, I want to patch this one now. And that reaches out and obviously touches a lot of different systems like Orchestrator, Configuration Manager, and Operations Manager. And what we end up with is a solution that provides, it took a very, large cost, if you will, for them to keep those 100 people there, once a month over the course of a year is about $300,000. But what it did more, I think, impactful than just save money is create happy platform managers, service owners. These people now don't have to wait around for IT once a month through the wee hours of the night. They can do this on demand and really creates an effective and happy workforce as well. And they get batches of computers in, about 2,000 at a time. They'll take them, they'll image them, and they'll ship them out from a centralized location. Well, what was happening was the computer refreshes obviously were going well. They're shipping out computers, but they started getting reports back or hearing reports that the computers they were shipping out were having issues. And they were having a myriad of issues. We had everything from motherboard issues to video driver issues to BIOS issues to battery issues. And so, the internal IT organization was trying to quantify this. How can we actually figure out what's happening here? Is it systemic? Is it something that is greater than what we're doing? Is it from the manufacturer, or is it our own doing? How do we quantify it? So the problem was they didn't have a lot of info. They would hear from somebody in Dubai that their computer was horrible, and it was secondhand, passed on knowledge. So communications again was very difficult there. So the solution, the idea was to create an offering through the portal that their employees could go out to, and if they got a new computer, just simply report that they're having an issue with it. And the end users, these are a lot of engineers, highly paid individuals who you shouldn't ask them to get the serial number off the bottom of the computer or do things like that. We're able to take and automatically deduce what computer they had based on configuration manager, user device affinity, and things of that nature, pull that information back, and then start running Orchestrator to do diagnostics across their machine to determine, okay, what's the base model, what's, all the details behind it, and then we could start stepping through to try and remedy their situation. Now, the results of this were quite surprising, because in this case, the info that came back actually provided empirical evidence that it was indeed the hardware manufacturer's fault. They went through, they said, okay, check the BIOS, update the BIOS to this specific version, update the video drivers, and you should have a beautiful working machine. But what happened was the fact that we were able to collect all this info, this WMI info that exists deep within the computer itself, attribute that directly to the service request from the end users in scale, provided that evidence that we were able to take back to that hardware manufacturer and say, you guys have something wrong with your hardware. And they couldn't turn away from that data. So they took that back and they actually changed the entire spec for that computer line. They took back every one of those computers as well from this customer and gave them new computers. Unheard of in the industry. Unheard of. So that was, I think, on order of 5,000 to 6,000 machines at that point by the time they got there. But the computer manufacturer changed their process, and they actually improved their platform worldwide because of the evidence that we were able to provide. There you go.
Nicely done. That was fun. I like those infographics.
Thanks.
All right, so now I want to just kind of talk about a typical automation project lifecycle. How are we doing on time here? Okay, bad. All right. So there's a pattern that you go through for each automation project. Chris has done this several times now. I've worked with several customers on these things. But basically, the project lifecycle is similar to any software development project. You're going to go through a project selection phase. You're going to gather requirements. You're going to create a specification. You're going to review and approve that specification. You're going to architect and design it. You're going to develop it, and then you're going to test it, and then you're going to do acceptance testing, and then you're going to finally do the rollout. And I've always loved this cartoon. Has anybody seen this cartoon before? This is a great one. Let's give you guys a second to consume that. My favorite one is the one in this corner here, how the project was documented. That was a good one. So, this is the nature of software development as well as automation projects that, if we don't communicate effectively, we end up with problems. So the first step is to select an automation project. So I've got here some criteria to consider when you're thinking about which projects should we do. And so you might want to think about how many times is this process done. And so Chris talked about the first case study where they had 500,000 requests per year, and they were able to automate a large portion of those. So the more times that something's being automated, the more times something's being done, and the longer it takes to do that, the more opportunity there is for a return on investment. So we can also think about, how much of that process can be automated. Maybe some of it still needs to be manual, but some of it can be automated. Can the whole thing be automated? We can think about that. What are the savings that are possible, especially in terms of human effort? We can think about the time to complete this. Can we reduce that by a large percentage? So these are some different things that you can think about when you're trying to select an automation project. We'll make this deck available. Just the questions to ask yourself, your team, when you're deciding on which projects to undertake. The next phase is requirements gathering. So here we want to define personas first. Personas are the types of people that would interact with this automation. So there might be a requester persona, There might be a approver persona. There might be a person that does something that's part of a manual process. So there's different types of people that are involved in a particular process. Then we think about scenarios. What are the different types of scenarios that would be done for this particular automation project? And then we would want to think about what are the expected inputs that we need to provide into the automation, and what are the outputs that we would expect from that automation. And the way that we can gather this information is just to go around and interview the stakeholders, whiteboard out the current process that you have that's a manual process. Just get it out on a whiteboard or in Visio so you can see it visually, and you can actually point at each step and say, is that automatable? Is that automatable? You know, you can just go down the line and figure out what portions of that process are automatable. And then you can also ask yourself questions about your current process, like what's good and bad about our current process. And as you automate a process, you can actually improve the things that are bad about your current process. Okay, now the next step is to do specification writing. This is a program manager at Microsoft. So I told you this is the fun part. Chris's part is not fun. So you know, once we get into specification writing, this is where we need to write a specification for each automation. So whether the automation is big or small, we want to create a spec for it. We want to document the inputs and outputs. Has anybody heard of the phrase critical to quality, CTQ? So a CTQ is a metric that you want to measure that helps you identify whether or not the solution you've built is good. So some examples of critical to quality metrics are things like the percent failure rate, or the time that it takes somebody to fill out a request form, or how long does the automation take to run? How many clicks does a user have to do in order to be able to do what they need to do? So these are different metrics that you can actually set goals for and then measure against as you build the solution. And then we also need to, in our specification, define the input mapping. So we take the input that the user is providing and we map that onto the automation engine. So this is just a diagram example of that, where we know that our workflow requires some information. It requires this parameter value to be passed in here. It needs to get a particular object like a user out of the CMDB maybe, and it might need to get the parent work item property off of this. And so this would be a service request work item here, and it might have some properties on it that are needed in this workflow script. Inside of this service request, we might have a runbook activity that has some additional properties on it that we're going to pass into our workflow. This runbook activity might have a related configuration item like a computer. And so what we need to do is we need to prompt the user to provide this information. So when we expose a request offering on the self-service portal, we'll prompt them for this information, and we'll map the responses the user provides to the service request or the activities inside of it, and then map that through to the automation workflow. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chris, and he's going to do a demo of automated service request fulfillment and automated diagnostics using Service Manager and Microsoft's new service management automation platform. Has anybody heard of SMA, or service management automation? Okay, a few people. You guys in the back, you guys. They're experts already, I'm sure. So I'll get out of your way so you can
Not a problem.
see.
There we go. Okay, so I am, oh, sorry. I am there in the middle. That's the one. Full screen. That's better. Now I won't be confused. Okay, so we're going to look at two scenarios, automated service request fulfillment and automated diagnostics. So from the service request fulfillment side, let's open up this guy here. And actually, we'll start from the beginning. So this is the self-service portal, kind of as we've alluded to, like through some of the scenarios. Here we've got some user account management option. We see that we can create a new AD user. And very simply, from our request form, we can fill out the username. And in this scenario, this is the only required field. Quite a nice automation, very easy. So we'll come up with, we'll say King Travis.
Nice. Wow. King of what, though?
Automation.
Oh, great.
King of automation.
Perfect.
So we'll fill out the required parameter, just like we saw in Travis's last slide. We'll go ahead and say next, and we can go ahead and submit this. We see SR 10819 has been created. The person who submits this can come in and actually see from the portal itself what's happening with this. So we see the status is new. We see that there's also a review activity and an automation activity. So we're going to automatically create the AD user via SMA. And SMA is that service management automation that Travis has talked about. I'll take you behind the scenes and show you what that actually looks like here in a moment. From here, let's go ahead and go into Service Manager. That's SR 10819. So I can go up to the corner. Oh, there we go. 1. Just have to change one number. I love it when that happens. So we see our service request. And this is create new user. We'll go ahead and open this up. And we see that we've got all the basic information that you would expect in Service Manager, including my input. King Travis is who we're looking at. We'll look at our activities. We actually see the service request. It's already in progress. There's a review activity waiting. Well, let's go ahead and open this really quick and just approve this. We'll say, yes, King it is. So we'll go ahead and say OK, submit this, and apply that. And what's happening now in the background is the workflow from Service Manager is taking this through the steps. So in a few moments, and it'll probably take, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds, we'll see our automation activity kick off. So we'll give that just a moment to, yes? To kick in. We'll give it a.
So we can see that the review activity is completed now because there was only the one reviewer, and that person approved it. You can have multiple reviewers. You can have groups be reviewers. You can have people vote on behalf of other people.
There we go. So our automation activity is started. Let's inspect this a bit more. So looks like a normal activity within Service Manager. We see we've got the normal tabs, runbook. But something's different. This isn't the standard runbook tab that you would expect to see. This is one that's specific for SMA. And if I scroll down, we'll see somewhere in this list.
Scroll the inner box there.
Yeah. Oh, I scrolled too far down for the inner box. Here we go.
Keep going. A little bit more.
A little bit more. We've got a lot of fields. Oh, there's text 1, King Travis. So that value has been set, and we can actually see the username. It's mandatory is true. So we're capturing all those required fields that you would expect. The great thing is, off to the right, I've got a couple of options now. I can view the runbook job itself and view the runbook. Let's go ahead and just view the runbook. I think that's pretty powerful. So this launches our service management portal, and this is the back-end side of what's happening. So we see how many times this is run, the actual status of it. We see that it was completed, let's see, 11:29. I have no idea what time zone we're in on this, but we can also look at the specific jobs behind it, who the author was, the authoring of the actual automation itself. And here, this is quite simply a PowerShell workflow that goes through and grabs the required data. If we take it into draft mode, this is what I love. We get all the benefits of working in a very rich editor like the ISE, the integrated scripting editor with PowerShell. So that means you get all the things like what do we have, like new -AD, See, we get like the IntelliSense, like I can tab and it'll autocomplete, all that fun stuff. I'll just get rid of that. So that's kind of behind the scenes of what this actually looks like. If I go back and open up, oh, wrong one. This guy again. Let's see, that was the run book. Was that the run book or the run book job?
You did run book. Now you do run book job.
Yeah.
So this is the actual run book that was executed.
Yes.
See the status is completed already.
Yep.
And you can see the inputs was King Travis. And
So we've brought all that data right to surface from the Service Manager console itself. So if I'll just cancel this. And if we refresh again, we've seen that that's completed. I should have a PowerShell window. Excellent. No. And looky there. We've got a user and AD. Very, very easy, very simple. So that's just a brief example of how that SMA connector from Cyrus hooks in and actually allows us to bridge the gap from Service Manager into SMA and provide automation through that new Microsoft platform itself. Let's go ahead and look at one that's a bit more integrated.
so let's.
Do we have time?
I don't think we have time. We only have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
I know. So fun.
Uh,
All right.
There
Well,
you
and if everybody wants to see the automated diagnostics demo
Yeah.
afterwards, we can do that. So, okay. Yes.
Can you tell us a bit why you are using SMA instead of Orchestrator? I think that would be interesting to highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. So SMA is based on PowerShell workflow, which is Microsoft's long-term strategy for automation. PowerShell is where Microsoft's doing all of its investment. Orchestrator was an acquisition that Microsoft made about, it's been like almost 4 years now,
Yeah.
probably. And so it's a good solution. It's got a nice visual designer. It has an activity library with several hundred activities in it that you can drag and drop into the designer and make connections and create your workflows that way. But SMA is going to be Microsoft's long-term strategy for automation. So people will continue to use Orchestrator for a while, but what I'm recommending people do is any new automation projects they're doing is to use Service Management Automation as their automation platform. I'm sure at some point, so you saw the editor today. It's not a visual drag and drop designer like you have in Orchestrator, but there's some advantages to a text editor. It makes it really easy to share workflows amongst people. So I can just grab the text, put it in an email, put it on a blog post. I can copy it from a blog post and put it into SMA easily. It's just not as easy to exchange that type of workflow activity or workflows in Orchestrator. So there's some advantages to having a text editor, and we don't really have time to show all the cool things you can do with that text editor. And I'm sure that Microsoft over time will create a better visual designer for SMA. But the main reason why I think SMA is a big advantage over Orchestrator is simply because the activity library for SMA is much, much larger. Because every PowerShell module and commandlet in those modules is available as an activity that you can use in a PowerShell workflow. So we're talking about literally thousands and thousands of activities just for Microsoft technologies, let alone all the VMware modules that are out there, and there's modules for pretty much anything that runs in a data center. So for every Microsoft product team, they create PowerShell modules and commandlets to be able to manage the products that are coming out of Microsoft. And for them, it's an additional effort to create an Orchestrator integration pack. And it's really hard to get them to actually go and build those things because they're already building the PowerShell modules. And so, that's a big part of why Microsoft is moving to have everything be PowerShell based. There's some other benefits of SMA that Orchestrator doesn't have, such as the ability to pause and resume workflows, persist the state of workflows. Workflows survive operating system reboots or network outages. What else? There's versioning in SMA, so you can version your runbooks. You can create drafts of your runbook and save those. You can't do that in Orchestrator.
Persistent sessioning.
There's a bunch
elevated,
of advantages of SMA. over Orchestrator. The one kind of key missing thing is that visual drag and drop designer, but I think over time that will be addressed as well. So does that answer the question? Yeah, okay. So a lot of people have already invested in Orchestrator. They've created a lot of runbooks, and those runbooks, you can continue to use those. Microsoft is going to continue shipping Orchestrator for a while. I don't know how long, but I'm almost positive it'll come out for at least one more release. And but at the same time, they now have SMA as well. And so for any new automation projects, I recommend creating an SMA. Okay, so let's go on to the next step in our process, which is to review and approve our specification. So have you guys ever heard of the ORP model, OARP? I think this is another Microsoft thing, I don't know. So OARP stands for the owner of a project, the approver of a project, the reviewers of a project, and the participants of a project.
It's kind of like a RACI chart. If you
yeah,
know,
RACI.
RACI.
That's probably a more common thing. So basically, you have these different types of people. They each have their roles in reviewing the specification. And my recommendation is when you do this is to do an iterative review model. So basically what I mean by that is that you start out with a very basic specification that outlines things at a kind of a high level. Review that with people, get feedback, go and provide more detail, review, more detail. And each time you go through an iteration, you add more detail and you address the feedback that you got from the review. So you just kind of go through this review cycle multiple times until you get to a point where people feel like they've been heard. They had an opportunity to have input into the process, and that makes it easier for people to approve the result that happens at the end. Okay, then we go into the architecture and design phase. So during this phase, we have to decide which automation technology are we going to use. Are we going to use PowerShell within Service Manager? Are we going to use Orchestrator? Are we going to use SMA? So you got lots of options there. You have to decide which ones. You have to look at which APIs are available for you to automate against. So basically every Microsoft product has PowerShell commandlets. Those are APIs that you can use to get into Microsoft products and automate things, as well as Windows Server, Windows Client. And lots of third-party products have these APIs through PowerShell as well. But then there's other APIs like web services that you can interact with, SQL queries that you can run, .NET libraries. So there's lots of different APIs that are available. You have to look at which ones there are. And if you need to, you might need to create some. And then we need to capture what inputs need to be provided by the user, what outputs we expect to see, look for possible failure points that might happen, and design automation around those, and do a security threat analysis. So look for any opportunities. And I would recommend actually maybe even hiring a security consultant to come in and help you identify security issues. Okay, then next is development. This is a Microsoft developer. He and the PM, they work really well together. So with development, there's a few suggestions here, which is to start with your mainline scenario first, and start small. And then as you get one thing working end to end, like a small piece, then start to expand out on that. Start to deal with the exceptions that might happen, the failure points, automate in resiliency for those situations. But the key is really just to start small and kind of grow big from there. The next phase is testing. I love this guy. I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production. It's a good one. So the key to testing is to act like you're the user. So go in, make a request as though you're a user of this automation system, and try to experience the whole thing end to end. And also try to test from each persona's perspective. So if you have an approver in the process, somebody should take the part of the approver and actually approve it. And then test scalability and performance. So you can actually automate the automation. So think about that, right? You've got an automated process. We'll now create another automated process that calls your automated process repeatedly to test the performance and scalability of it. So you sort of automate your automation. And then we want to test our input boundaries. We want to test, what if somebody enters a really big number or a really long string, or they use some unusual characters, and so we want to kind of test these boundaries. And then the CTQs, those critical to quality metrics that we defined earlier, we want to now test those at this point. The next phase is acceptance. So this is where we have our stakeholders actually go through and use the solution and provide any feedback, iterate on that, improve it as required, and then ultimately have the owner sign off on the acceptance of the solution. And then the last step is the rollout. And the one big suggestion that I can make here, are you guys familiar with the whole Obamacare website issue in the US? Okay, so the big problem there was they said, hey, let's roll out a website that has a lot of complicated integration on the back end, and let's have millions and millions and millions of people hit it on the first day all at the same time. Okay, that was a bad idea. Okay, so don't repeat that same problem with your automation rollout. Roll it out in small groups at first until you get feedback on it, you see that it can scale and so on. And then once you're done with that and it works great, then you want to have a huge launch party, have Swedish House Mafia come and provide the music at your big party. That'll make people want to do more automation projects, and then it just is a cycle, right? So, okay, so that's just kind of some things to think about as you think about how to get people to buy into automating things and to realize the benefits of automation. Hopefully it gave you a good idea of what an automation project should look like, what kind of tools are available. Hopefully the demo that Chris gave gives you an idea of what it looks like from a administrator's perspective setting up the automation, as well as from the perspective of a user requesting something. So with that, I think we have a few minutes left for some questions, but
I think we're
right on
yeah.
time. So if there's any questions, we can take those real quick. Otherwise, it's time for a break. Any questions? No?
We did a great job.
Wow. Or a really bad job.
Or a really bad one.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'll default to great.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're available
Awesome.
up here if you have any questions during the break. And thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you.